Bless you, bless you. So now we are recording, and I will welcome you again to our fourth session of our class on Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And a lot of what we're going to be doing tonight is I'm going to be showing you brief videos. And in some cases, I'll only show you parts of videos that I found online. I would say I'm obsessed with Jerusalem. And I love it, and it was really hard for me to cut things down. So welcome again. Once again, I want to acknowledge the Jewish Federation of Ventura County and the Joel and Barbara Aronson and the Affordable Living Choices Trust that they manage, and encourage you, and I know many of you have, to make contributions to the Federation. And the website is down there, jewishventuracounty.org. Once again, I am recording. Thank you for reminding me. All the sessions, and on the website now I have a complete set of all the slides. And one of the things I just discovered is you'll see tonight, many of the videos I'm going to show you are videos from a website. And I discovered if you download the copies of the slides, it's a big PDF, but you can actually click on the website in the PDF and see the entire video that I have. So here we go. Where in the world is Jerusalem? So I want to narrow in on Jerusalem. Sometimes it's easy to forget what a tiny country Israel is. And so it's right there, and zooming in a little bit, here it is surrounded really by Arab countries. And then Jerusalem is right in the middle of the state, and it's right on the border between the West Bank and the Jewish state. And at one point in time, this whole area was part of Jordan. So Jerusalem was literally divided in half, and we'll talk something about the history. And I will warn you in advance, I'm going to try and resist your questions to get through the session, if I can. And then if you look at ancient maps, sort of stylizing where is Jerusalem, what do we mean by Jerusalem, you will see it is at the center of the world. And there's there's actually some good cause to understand that, because it was at the crossroads and on trade routes. So it was very important strategically, very important economically. So here is a map of the old city. And I just want to orient you. I know not everybody has spent a year in Jerusalem. Not everybody is quite as obsessed as I am with Jerusalem. But the old city, and there's walls built, I think in the 1200s, 1300s, now I can't quite remember, around this city, dominated by the Temple Mount and the Dome of the Rock. And there are four quarters. There's the Muslim quarter, the Christian quarter, the Armenian quarter, and the Jewish quarter. And then out here is the modern city of Jerusalem, which is dominated by Jewish influence. And then to the east, you have East Jerusalem, which is mainly an Arab Muslim city. And then this is sort of a picture of the city. So you can see the Dome of the Rock, and this entire area is the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount is huge. This is kind of interesting, same idea, but if you were to strip away, and I think one of the videos does this, if you were to strip away everything and ask what did Jerusalem look like before there were any buildings on it, it would make the shape of a shin. These are different valleys. And of course, the shin has significance in Judaism, as you find it on virtually every mezuzah. It stands for El Shaddai, God of the mountains, or God Almighty. So
what is the religion of the Armenians?
It's a form of Christianity. Okay.
Orthodoxy.
So we're going to watch a video. So here we go. And Cheryl, I'm going to look to you to give me a thumbs up to make sure you can hear it.
Jerusalem is a sprawling and modern city of about 800,000 people. Exploring its shopping boulevards and...
Whoops, I'm sorry. That was my fault.
Walls, an American feels right at home. But its historic core, the old city, home to around 35,000, feels lost in time. Its venerable walls corral a tangle of vibrant sights. Within a 10-minute walk, you can see the Church of the Holy Sepulcher, so sacred to Christians. The Dome of the Rock, treasured by Muslims. And at Temple Mount, the holiest place in Judaism, the Western Wall. For so many people, Jerusalem is the closest place on earth to heaven. Much of Jerusalem's importance rests upon a very special rock, which lies under this glittering dome. Muslims believe Muhammad journeyed to heaven from this rock, and they've worshipped here for 1,300 years.
Oh, you know what? Every time I go to admit anyone, it's going to pause. So I'm going to make, hang on, Cheryl, I'm going to make you a co-host and just admit people. Something I didn't think of.
This glittering shrine, the Dome of the Rock, is one of Jerusalem's enduring landmarks. Intricate geometric designs in stone and tile fit within its pure and simple lines. While today this plaza functions as a massive mosque for Muslims, Jews call this place Temple Mount. It was the site of their ancient temple complex, only the foundation of which survives. It's here that they believe Abraham, as a test of his faith, was asked to sacrifice his son, Isaac. Considering this spot the center of the earth, Jews have worshipped here for 3,000 years.
1,000 years before Christ, King David united the 12 tribes of Israel and captured Jerusalem. His son, Solomon, built the first temple right here. It was later destroyed, and the second temple was built. Then came the catastrophic year for the Jews, 70 AD, when the Romans destroyed their temple and ushered in the diaspora. That's when the Jews became a people without a land and dispersed throughout the world.
Here at that surviving bit of foundation called the Western Wall, Jews mourn a horrible past and pray for a better future. The square operates as an open-air synagogue. The faithful believe prayers left in cracks between these ancient stones will be answered. It's a lively scene, with intense yet private worship mixing with the joyous commotion of Jewish families from around the world celebrating bar mitzvahs, a ritual coming of age.
Okay. I probably am going to regret this. Does anyone have a quick question based on the video? Not a speech, but a question. Okay, good. So again, this is all about the sacred. And in the Bible, the first thing, and actually in the opening of the Bible, the only thing that is called Kodesh, holy, is time. Opening book of actually at the end of the first story of creation, it says God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it. And of course, as you know in the story, God gives the land to Abraham, but it's not described as holy. The only thing that's holy is time. And in rabbinic tradition, the reason we have a temple is that God realized that people needed something physical, a place to worship. And the rabbis say it was after the sin of the golden calf. Never mind in the actual text, it comes before the sin of the golden calf, but there's no time before or after in Torah. So the understanding is that once God saw the Israelites needing an idol to worship, God realized we, like other peoples, would also need a sacred holy place. Very brief overview of history, and some of these you'll see in other videos. In terms of Jerusalem, David conquers, Jerusalem is not mentioned in the Torah. In fact, even when they talk about you can only worship at the temple in Jerusalem, the phrase is you can only sacrifice animals and worship at the temple, at the place where God will cause God's name to dwell. So it is post wandering in the desert that you have, you have the Israelites in the land, they conquer the land, you have a time of judges, you have King Saul, and then you have King David, and David conquers the city, and brings the tabernacle. We'll see that also in some of the videos, but is not allowed to build the temple. The tradition is because David was a man of war, he was not allowed to build the temple, but his son Solomon, whose Hebrew name is Shlomo, meaning his peace, is allowed to build the temple. So Solomon builds the first temple in about 900 BCE. That temple is destroyed in 586 by BCE by the Babylonians. It's rebuilt 50 to 80 years later, but the rebuilt temple is a pale copy of the original. And the second temple is sort of upgraded or rebuilt by the Romans in the year 30 BC, and then they proceed to destroy it in the year 70 BC. So these are just obviously artist concepts, and there's all kinds of controversy in the archaeological world about, how this really looked. So in Solomon's time, here is the Temple Mount, and you'll see Solomon's temple in a moment. And there's speculation that he had a palace here. There's other speculation that he had a palace here. And then this area is called the City of David. It was a walled city. And one of the key elements of it was there was a spring, the Gihon spring here, and the water was piped underground into the city. So here's an artist's image of what Solomon's temple might have looked like. We have very, very few concrete artifacts from that time in terms of building structure and archaeology. And here comes another video. This is kind of an introduction. And they're talking here about Solomon's temple, not Herod's temple.
Solomon's temple stood in Jerusalem for almost 400 years. It was the crown jewel of Jerusalem and the center of worship to the Lord. Almost half of the Old Testament writings took place during the time when Solomon's temple was still standing. Understanding the significance of its location, history, and design can greatly add to one's reverence for one of the most holy places in the world. The city of Jerusalem is located in an area of three major valleys: the Hinnom, the Central or Tyropian, and the Kidron Valley. The mountain range between the Central and Kidron Valley is called Mount Moriah. The peak of the mountain is a large protruding flat rock, which is now located under the dome of the rock. According to Genesis 22:2, Abraham was commanded to sacrifice Isaac in the region of Moriah, connecting the Temple Mount with this significant event. At the time of King David, the area of Jerusalem was controlled by the Jebusites, the city only occupying the southern part of the central ridge. When David captured the city in about 1000 BC, he made Jerusalem his capital. David then moved the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem and began preparations for building a permanent structure to replace the portable tabernacle of Moses that had been used for over 400 years. With the ancient city of Jerusalem being fairly small, David purchased the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite so he could expand the size of the city. Being higher than the city of David, the hilltop would make a beautiful place to build the temple of the Lord. Under the reign of David's son, King Solomon, the temple construction began. After 7 years of construction in about 960 BC, Solomon finished building the temple, most likely built over this same protruding rock of Mount Moriah. Solomon also built himself a new palace just south of the temple and expanded the walls of the city up towards the peak of Mount Moriah. The Temple of Solomon was modeled after the Tabernacle of Moses. Because of the many similarities between the Tabernacle and the Garden of Eden, many scholars believe that the Garden of Eden was the prototype for the tabernacle.
I'm going to pause this here because he goes into speculation that I've never heard. And if you're interested in a Christian take on this, you can see the rest of this. It's a 10-minute video at the website that I mentioned down below.
Tabernacle.
So now this is actually about a 3-minute introduction to the inside of the temple. The other one is like a 10-minute version. This one is not narrated, so I will comment. So here's the temple. The gates are facing east. This is an altar of sacrifice. The temple system was all about sacrificing animals, and they've actually found traces of hemoglobin because of all the blood that was shed in sacrificing these animals. It says brazen sea is made of brass.
Does it still look like that?
There's no trace of this.
Oh, okay.
So the speculation is this was all looted when the Babylonians conquered the temple and Nebuchadnezzar took all of these things away. These images, which look very Egyptian to me, I believe are representations of the cherubs, the cherubim. So inside the temple, you have higher and higher degrees of holiness as you penetrate and walk toward the Holy of Holies. So you have a 7-branch menorah, which today is the symbol of Judaism. That we use in the temple service. What we use now, which is a vestige of this, is challah. I don't know if you can hear me because the music's pretty loud. So this is the Holy of Holies, and at the center of the Holy of Holies is the Ark of the Covenant. And in the Ark of the Covenant was the original tablets. So if you want to see a very Christian version of that, click on the link. It's much longer and it's narrated, which is very interesting and helpful, but definitely Christian. So one of the questions that is sort of it's very much an archaeological question, is the question of where was the original Temple Mount, and people specifically. This couple, Kathleen Lean and Kathleen Rittmeyer, wrote a book, and this is actually their article in the Biblical Archaeological Review, where they do very fine analysis of the rocks and the stones and vestiges of the walls and the layout to try and find the original, basically Solomon's Temple Mount. This area, which is quite large, is a very large expansion of what was the original Temple Mount. So one of the things we're going to spend really some time looking at is what the temple looked like in Herod's time, and you'll see, I think, a nice video on that. And there's a couple of things I want to point out. So right here is where the Western Wall is today, except the level of the ground is about up to here. We'll see that. So this was the city of Jerusalem, and when you wanted to come to the temple, you had to get over this valley running between the city and the temple. So there were bridges. and we'll see vestiges of this arch here, and we'll also see vestiges of this Robinson's arch. This is the western wall. This is then the southern wall. These gates that you can see here, actually you can still see them. They're not open. They are bricked up, but they are here. The Dome of the Rock is sitting right on, archaeologists are pretty much in agreement that the Dome of the Rock is sitting right on top of the Temple Mount. I'm going to try and take a quick look at chat. Boy, I really don't have a chance to look at all the chat and keep going. Sorry. So you'll just have to ask questions when we get done. These steps, you can still go up these steps, and they've been rebuilt, but there are still many steps in the original. And my first 2 congregational trips to Israel, I conducted Friday night services sitting on these steps. And, you know, for Jews, there is no question that Hillel and Shammai and the great rabbis of the Mishnaic era would have walked on these steps. For Christians, and I think some of the videos highlighted, there is no question that Jesus would have walked up these steps. So here is a closer look at the temple as developed by Herod.
Towards the end of the Second Temple period, in the 18th year of his reign, Herod, king of Judah, gathers the people of Jerusalem and surprises them with a dramatic announcement. Herod states his intention to raise the old temple, built on Mount Moriah, by the returnees from Babylon, and to build a new temple in its place, the most sacred and beautiful of our time. The Jews are appalled. The thought that this tyrant, who has murdered thousands of people, would tamper with their holiest site merely for the sake of self-aggrandizement terrifies them. They're afraid that Herod will destroy the old temple without completing the construction of the new one, leaving them without a place to serve God, neither the old nor the new. The people are frantic. What will happen? Josephus recounts that Herod reassured the Jews by promising to prepare all the building materials in advance, before even one stone was removed from the existing temple. According to the Talmud, the story involves a secret agreement between Herod and a Jewish sage by the name of Baba ben Buta. In a private meeting, Herod expresses regret for his past violence against the Jews and agrees to atone by building a glorious new temple that will spread its light around the world. He extinguished the light of the world, let him now go and kindle the light of the world. This agreement opens a historic window of opportunity. The great builder of Caesarea, Masada, Herodium, and countless other projects joins forces with the Jewish people. Together, they will turn the small, modest temple in Jerusalem into a large, magnificent house of worship that will leave a deep imprint on humanity. The work begins with a tremendous burst of activity. Herod gathers thousands of carts and beasts of burden, cranes, wooden pulley blocks, engineering devices, and quarrying tools of all kinds. 10,000 Jewish workers, along with the top engineers in the Roman world, tackle the job. Hundreds of priests take care of building the sacred areas. But one problem still threatens to thwart the entire project: Mount Moriah. The site designated for the new temple is narrow and steep. The area available for construction is limited and certainly not suitable for the monumental compound that Herod envisioned. Herod's solution is bold and ambitious. Build huge walls that would support a giant plaza and then construct the temple in the center of the plaza. The most important part of the plan is the use of enormous building stones to ensure the stability of the Temple Mount walls. Look at these stones. Each stone weighs a few tons. The biggest stones weigh hundreds of tons each. This one, for example, weighs 600 metric tons. Without any mortar at all, the tremendous weight of the stones stabilizes them in place as if they were one solid rock. Transporting such a stone from the quarry north of the Temple Mount and placing it in the Temple Mount walls requires precise planning, sophisticated technology, and most importantly, a lot of hard work. This entire slope was one big quarry. Many stones measuring 2 to 4 meters long have been found in the Arzei Habirah quarry. We could see how we have a negative image of the Western Wall stones here in the Arzei Habirah quarries. We discovered an amazing axe. An axe is a wonderful quarrying tool. When you strike the Jerusalem limestone with 2.3 kilograms and try to create a channel, the channel forms very quickly. Primitive tools on the whole, but methods that work to this day. These stones were brought in carts, hitched to oxen. Some of the stones were encircled with wooden wheels so that they could be moved quickly and efficiently. Particularly, large stones were placed on long log rollers and moved by a large team of workers with the help of animals. To lift the stones up high, the workers used cranes, pulleys, and sloped earthen embankments. The stones were put in place with the utmost precision. This was made possible by a technique known as Herodian drafted margin masonry. By creating a border around the stone, the workers could join the stone precisely with the course beneath it and with the stone next to it, producing a perfectly straight row. Each new course of stones was placed a few centimeters deeper than the previous one, as in a pyramid. The way the stones were joined at the corners of the Temple Mount made the structure so strong that it survived even the most powerful earthquakes in Israel over the centuries. Quarrying, transporting, lifting, setting in place. All these jobs require precision like a well-timed orchestra, but this did not always happen. This stone, for instance, fell off the western wall while the work was in progress, and it got stuck here in the drainage channel at the foot of the western wall. For the workers' sake, I hope no one told Herod. Course after course, the walls are built, from the natural rock deep underground to the tremendous height of 30 meters above street level. The dimensions of the Temple Mount are mind-boggling. The western wall that we know is just a small part of a huge wall 500 meters long. To give you an idea, the total area of the Temple Mount is 144,000 square meters, equal to the area of 30 soccer fields. But the Temple Mount is just the frame. The main task, the construction of the temple itself, still lies ahead. We have to hurry. The workers work non-stop, from dawn to dark. Reportedly, even after a night of hard rain, they didn't miss a day's work. The next morning, the wind blew, the clouds dispersed, the sun shone, and the people went out to work. And they knew they were engaged in the work of heaven. But despite the pressure, some things take precedence. On Friday, the feverish pace slows, and before the Sabbath, the work stops completely. Jerusalem is enveloped by the Sabbath rest. I'm standing here next to a corner of the Temple Mount. This is the cornerstone of the Temple Mount. And it was the first stone that the Romans knocked down after capturing the city when they started to destroy the Temple Mount walls. An inscription was discovered on this stone. It was written in Hebrew, beautiful Hebrew. Let's read it together. For the house of trumpeting too. I'm inclined to agree with those who complete it as follows: for the house of trumpeting to distinguish between the sacred and the profane. And that brings us to Josephus, the historian of that period, who tells us that on the eve of the Sabbath, a priest would go up, trumpet in hand, and blow the trumpet to announce the start of the Sabbath. Whoever was working at the time would stop. Here we are in the streets, the main street of Jerusalem, with shops on either side. So anyone who had a shop here would certainly have to shut it immediately because the Sabbath was starting. After filling the space between the supporting walls of Mount Moriah with large stone arches, the builders embarked on the next stage, building the huge plaza on which the temple would stand. Tens of thousands of believers from Israel and the diaspora would assemble in this plaza. The plan called for them to stand on a floor decorated according to the finest standards of Roman architecture.
From Josephus' writings, we knew that the Temple Mount was paved with multicolored stones. Then tiles began showing up in the material we were sifting from the Temple Mount. Tiles of various varieties of stone in many colors and many different shapes. I had the feeling that some of these were the ones that Josephus had written about. We had found them. This was a fascinating puzzle to assemble. By measuring the sizes and the shapes of the original tiles, I could determine what patterns may have been used. The geometric shapes and brilliant stone colors were right in front of my eyes. For me, it was the closing of a personal circle. I was raised in the Catholic Church in the United States until I discovered my Jewish roots and immigrated to Israel. And now I reconstruct the floors on which my ancestors and the ancestors of all the Jewish people walked 2,000 years ago.
Around the Temple Mount Plaza, porticos of magnificent columns were built, the stoas. The most magnificent of all was the Royal Stoa. The Royal Stoa was where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is today, behind me. Known as Stoa Basilia, this was the largest building in Israel until the modern era. In Antiquities of the Jews, Josephus Flavius describes the building as a forest of columns. It contained 162 columns, each made of a single stone. It would take 3 men with outstretched arms to encircle one column. This structure, which was a sort of basilica, was used for secular purposes. It is the location of the shops where the Sanhedrin met after being exiled from the Hall of Hewn Stones adjacent to the temple. To allow entrance to the Royal Stoa, a monumental staircase was built that rose up from a vibrant shopping center here at the foot of the Western Wall. A huge arch, Robinson's Arch, supported an elevated passage that crossed the busy street without disrupting traffic. The main entrance to the Temple Mount were the Hulda gates in the southern wall. 2 gates were planned, an entrance and an exit. This ensured that the huge crowds would flow in and out quickly and efficiently. The great width of the steps leading to the gates created an atmosphere of splendor and reverence. The stairs were designed with treads of varying sizes, forcing the pilgrims into a relaxed, dignified pace as they ascended to the holy place. When they emerged at the Temple Mount Plaza, the pilgrims saw an astonishing sight. The huge plaza, the Stoa, the courts, the ornate gates. At the top of the hill, towering to the heavens, rose the temple building itself. Wide in front and narrow in back, the temple reminded the ancients of a seated lion, his mane facing forward. A grapevine made of sparkling gold leaf curved upward from the entrance to the temple building. Golden adornments shone on the roof as on a royal crown. The construction work was completed in record time. In just a year and a half, the Jews, under Herod's direction, finished building the temple. The residents of Jerusalem looked at their handiwork. Before them rose one of the largest, most magnificent houses of prayer in the entire world. Even Titus, who destroyed the temple, declared it the glory of human creation. Whoever has not seen Herod's building has never seen a beautiful building in their life. Tens of thousands of pilgrims, Jews and non-Jews alike, thronged the new temple to worship the God of Israel. They came from around the world to see the biggest sacred compound ever built. A temple built for an invisible God with no images or idols. Its gates open to everyone. A house of prayer for all nations.
So I will just comment that I think it's an overstatement at the end that it was open to everyone. There was areas in the temple that were only open to men. There were areas that were only open to priests and Levites. There were areas that were only open to priests, and there were areas only open to the high priest. And so this idea of a house of prayer for all peoples, I think may come up to, I'm not sure the exact reference, but one of the ideas here is that eventually in the Messianic age, everyone will come to know the God of Israel. The main point I want to make, as you glance at some of these images of Herod's temple, is this is biblical Judaism. If you want to know the Judaism that was practiced in biblical times, the Judaism of Jesus, this is what we're talking about. We're not talking about synagogues. We're not talking about group prayer. We're talking about a place of animal sacrifice and a very hierarchical structure. So I will ask if people have questions of clarifications rather than alternative speeches. I'll take a moment. So Jane, you have a question?
Yeah, just one question. I'm a little confused. First of all, women aren't part of this at all, correct?
There is an area in the main court of the temple where women could be, but
Back
not
then.
as you get in. I'm sorry, yes.
Okay. And the other thing is, when we had the last year when Israel and the Arabs were fighting and all of that stuff, I thought there was one of the major edifices that was destroyed.
I'm not aware of what you're talking about, so, but I don't think it was connected with the Temple Mount.
I was wondering about the Temple Mount or the rock of the Dome of the...
No, the Temple Mount and the Dome of the Rock was not destroyed. One of the things we'll see later is the Muslims have control over the Temple Mount,
Right.
although the Israelis ultimately have control of everything and security. One of the unfortunate things from the standpoint of archaeology is the Muslims have not allowed archaeology to continue to take place. There was like 100, 150 years ago, British archaeology. So Robinson's Arch and so on is named after a British archaeologist. And they did actually look under the temple, and you can see these great vaults where the temple is supported. The Muslims excavated an area under the temple and just dumped dirt over the wall. And so archaeologists have spent the last 20 years sifting that. And that's where you saw the tiles. And I actually did a little bit of this, and I will show a video of that sifting. So I'm going to try and go quickly because there's a lot of material. Cheryl.
Weren't there stories that during certain periods, the high priest would have a rope tied around him as he entered the Holy of Holies?
Yes. So the only time the priest entered the Holy of Holies was on Yom Kippur afternoon. And he was the only one allowed into the Holy of Holies. So the issue would be what happened if he dropped dead. No one would be allowed to go in and get him. So they tied a rope around him to pull him out in case he dropped dead. That's the story. And we're sticking to it. Les, you're muted. You're muted, Les.
Excuse me. It said earlier that when Herod built this, it was just a small replica of it or a small version of it. Is this the small version of what it would have been like when Solomon built it?
So Solomon built a magnificent temple, but it took a small amount of what is now the Temple Mount. So what Herod did, and actually, you know, in some of these books, you can see details. What Herod did was to greatly expand the section of where the temple stood. David. You are muted, David. Can't hear you. You're not muted, but we can't hear you. Desmond and Emily.
Rabbi Lotker, we watched a documentary several months ago by a Christian author where he posited that Herod's temple was not really, that the Western Wall is really not part of the temple of Herod's temple, but rather that Herod's temple was located in the city of David, and that what
Yes.
we're
Okay. Okay. So I can only tell you, I just want to cut it short because I don't want to argue it. I don't know of any serious archaeology that suggests that. And there's compelling archaeology about the existence of the Temple Mount, but the world of archaeology has its controversies. There's not much found in the city of David, and now there's even the latest class I attended. They're even doubting whether the city of David was the site of David's palace. David, try again. Okay, it's not working, David. Good luck.
How did they pay for it?
When you're the king, you do what you want. What can I tell you? Taxes. In fact, one of the issues, I think, when you study the history of Israel is Solomon heavily, or actually the children of Solomon and Solomon heavily taxed the people, leading to a tax revolt. And that's one of the reasons that the kingdom split into northern and southern kingdoms, according to the biblical account. Bryce, quick.
Yeah, I would echo some of the economic arguments. To the number of workers required, the size of the area. I just don't see a tax base being able to support building this kind of a giant temple in a year and a half.
It's astounding that it was built in a year and a half. I mean, I know people that were burned out of the Thomas fire that 3 or 4 years later still haven't been able to rebuild their homes.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know if I can believe it, because as it was described, it's just amazingly magnificent.
Yes.
But
So there is no question that it existed. I don't know where the specific accounts of the year and a half come from. Okay, let's get back to our presentation. So in Jerusalem, there is an enormous, I wish I could have had a picture of people walking around. This is a pathway. There's an enormous model of of Jerusalem in the time of Herod. So this is the eastern wall. Here's the city of Jerusalem and Herod's temple. And what I was told is when they were doing this, whenever they would make an archaeological discovery, they would go back into the model and adjust it to correct it. So some of the elements, these are the southern wall steps, the gates that we saw, Robinson's Arch, Wilson's Arch, the temple itself, and then here's some of the things that were found in the based on archaeology of what the city of Jerusalem might have looked like in this time. I'm fascinated by Robinson's Arch. I'm fascinated by everything in this. So here's Robinson's Arch. In 1967, when the Israelis got control of this area, this was Robinson's Arch. There was an onion field right here. So the ground that had accumulated over 2,000 years was up to the base of the arch. And today, there's no good indication, but I would say this is about the height of a person. So Robinson's Arch is looming high above things, and it just gives you an indication of how much has been taken out. Kat.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the Ark of the Covenant. It has never been found, right? No traces of it at all?
Correct. And the theory is that Nebuchadnezzar probably took it in the destruction of the first temple. And a lot of speculation, I don't know how authoritative this is, that in the time of the second temple, there was no Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies. But we really don't know.
It should be there somewhere, like eventually.
Not necessarily, could have been melted down for the gold.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
So this is Wilson's Arch on this bridge. And then today, this is the Western Wall. And the arch is just kind of half of an arch. And it's actually leading to the indoor prayer area where the men pray. It's in the men's side of the Western Wall. And today, here's the Western Wall. It is under the control of the Orthodox rabbinate. It's considered a synagogue. So there's a men's section, a women's section, and then a bridge, which in good times Jews can use to go up and enter the Temple Mount. And when I was there, I could actually go in the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And then here, this is only a few years old, and at the very end, I have a video of me leading a service right here. There is a mixed prayer area. So this is kind of is run by the conservative and the reform movements in Israel. So men and women can pray together. It is a Western Wall. It isn't the Western Wall of tradition, because as you saw in ancient times, this was covered by dirt. Whereas this area, and you'll see some pictures, has been kept clear. Okay, so here's a colorized painting. I don't know if it's a photograph or a painting of what the Western Wall looked like before 1948. It was quite narrow and closed in. There was not a lot of room there. And one of the things that the Israelis did, and it was controversial when they got control of the old city of Jerusalem, was to completely demolish all the Arab buildings. This is in the Arab Quarter, to make a great plaza, which is what you see there today. Another shot. The other thing, which I think is kind of interesting, is you can tell Herodian stones. I don't know if you noticed it, but the way Herod built his building blocks, he built like a frame around it. I can't remember if I have more pictures of that, but you can clearly tell just by glancing at a stone whether it was a Herodian stone. So here's, what the scholars would say is you have 7 courses of Herodian stones, and then remember around the year 70, the temple is destroyed, and a lot of these stones are destroyed. As you light fires, the limestone expands and explodes. So then you have courses of other stones erected by in other times. Here's an example of how they were taken out of the ground. And let's see. Yeah, here's a good picture of this. Is actually in that mixed prayer area, but you can clearly see here the kind of the picture frame effect that makes the Herodian stones really clear. And you can phone home from the Western Wall. When one of my trips to the Western Wall, I called Sonia so she could say some prayers, and I held the phone up to the rocks. And of course, there's the old joke. People ask, well, you went to the Western Wall and you prayed there. What was it like? And the joke, of course, is it's like talking to a wall.
Yeah. They just cleared out all the little things that were put in.
They clear it out every night.
And they bury them.
I don't know what they do with them, but I'll tell you my experience.
They said they bury them. They showed them.
Shh. I would go there at all hours, and late at night, I was there when they had a pressure washer, washing the little pieces of paper out, and they were sweeping them up. I don't know what they did with them. And of course, when I lived there, it was in the time of faxes. So I remember sitting in the plaza there, and you remember how the faxes were in rolls of paper, kind of a greasy paper?
Yeah.
A guy would come with several rolls of paper and just jam them into a crack. So if you faxed your prayers to the Western Wall, that's what happened to him. But at least whenever you go there, you'll see paper there. Right. But at least on one night, I saw a guy with a pressure washer just clearing it out. Okay, end of, I don't know, Bryce, if you still have your hand up, or Kat, but I'm going to call on Larry.
No. Oh, sorry. How do I get it down?
Larry, you have your hand up.
Lower hand. Got it.
Thank you. Something I wanted to clarify is, because if I understood in this, they said that Herod built the third temple. That's not true.
They didn't say third temple. I would have noticed that. It's the reconstruction of the second temple. You're absolutely right.
That's correct. It's the reconstruction of the second temple.
Right.
But what they did is the Levites were trained by the skilled folks to work on the shell that went around the second temple. So Herod, the temple that you see on the outside is a shell with the second temple on the inside. and that shell increased it by 90 cubits.
Yeah, so
but it was not built by skilled folks. It was Levites that were trained because of that very thing.
Yeah,
that they
the
were
sanctity,
concerned
probably.
that it wouldn't be
we have a
completed.
lot to cover. Murray, do you have something brief? Okay, so we're going to move on to the Church of the Holy Sepulcher, which is the holiest spot in the Christian world. It's a plausible site for the crucifixion. And one of the issues that that caused controversy about it was that it was inside the walls of the city as we find it today. And in Jewish law, you cannot have a cemetery inside a walled city. But what they discovered as they did more archaeology, and you'll see that in some of the pictures and videos, that at the time of Jesus, that site was outside the walls of the city. And you'll also see a description of Jewish graves found in the base of the church. And one of the things that made it very plausible was that in the 4th century, when during the time of the Emperor Constantine, he sent his mother to the Holy Land when he converted to Christianity, and the Romans had built a Roman temple on top of where the church was, and it was the Romans' practice to continue building temples on top of existing holy sites. So it's very plausible, and the more I'm not aware of any archaeology that contradicts this as the plausible site of Jesus' crucifixion and burial, and if you're a Christian, resurrection.
Yep.
So here's during the time of Jesus, the walls of the city, there was a rock which is sometimes called Calvary, comes from the root word for skull because the rock looked like a skull, sometimes called Golgotha. Golgotha is the Aramaic word for skull. So here would be the site of the crucifixion, and a very short distance away would have been a tomb. And this kind of shows there's Golgotha, and there's the tombs as surrounded by the church. Just some images. I'm obsessed with this ladder that's been on the church. It's going to be explained. The ladder has been there for I think about 250 years, and they'll explain why. And of course, some of the notable things about the church is the site of the crucifixion, and then a building has been built around the plausible site of Jesus' grave. What I'm told by archaeologists is that Queen Helena found several Jewish graves in the building, and apparently she decided which one was Jesus, but there are others. Okay, here we go. I hope this is, yeah.
Called Golgotha, Aramaic for skull, or Calvary, was then outside of Jerusalem's old city walls, right next to a garden. The site of the church was declared as the place where Jesus was crucified almost 300 years later. The year was 325 AD. The Roman Emperor Constantine adopted Christianity as a legal state religion and sent his mother, Helena, to scout Jerusalem for sites relating to Jesus' life. Legend has it that when Helena reached Jerusalem, she was told there was only one old Jew who remembered the exact location of the Golgotha, and he directed her to a pagan temple. A brief excavation revealed an empty cave tomb and a cistern containing the remains of 3 crosses. The Romans crucified Jesus along with 2 thieves. Helena, who believed that the Romans built their temples over sites deemed holy to other religions, declared that this is the Golgotha site where Jesus was crucified, and since then, the site has changed hands many times. Since this is the holiest site in the Christian world, each stream in Christianity claims to be responsible for this holy site. Many churches put pressure on the Ottoman Empire to gain more control over the church. In 1862, the Ottomans declared that the status of the church would revert to that of 1767. We do not know why particularly this year, but this was the year the Greeks managed to take control of extensive...
I just want to highlight, let's see if I can highlight. This stone is supposedly the stone that Jesus was laid out on after the crucifixion. I don't think archaeologists would say it's the actual stone, but you will see people pouring water over the stone and gathering up the water and taking it home. It's a site of super veneration.
areas within the church. The status quo has remained unchanged to this day. An illustration of this sensitive situation is the small ladder placed under the window over there. In the past, it is believed that this ladder used to bring food to the Armenian monks who were locked inside by the Turks. Now, this ladder is still there since 1767. Today,
So my understanding why the ladder is still there, whoops, hope I didn't lose it. Oh gosh, let me go back. My understanding of why the
Golgotha, Aramaic where Jesus was crucified, and since
why the ladder is still there is that to move the ladder gives the Christian group who moves the ladder control over that section. So there's controversy about who could move it. So the answer is nobody can.
Oh.
revert to that of 1767. We do not know why particular window over there. In the past denominations, the primary custodians are the Greek Orthodox, Armenian Apostolic, and Roman Catholic Church, with lesser duties shared by Coptic, Ethiopian, and Syriac Orthodox churches. The whole church is carefully parceled into sections, some being commonly shared, while others belonging strictly to a particular sect. The Church of the Holy Sepulcher is the holiest site in Christianity, more so than the Basilica of St. Peter in Rome or the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. However, it is not particularly beautiful or impressive. On the contrary, it has been marked by 2,000 years of earthquakes and fires, deliberate destruction, and natural wear and tear.
To my opinion, this decor is better suited to immortalizing the Passion of Jesus.
Okay, so now we're gonna see another one, and I want to start at about 140.
Hi, my name is Evan Frankel, and I'm the founder of...
Now, let's enter the church. When we enter the church, we see in front of us the stone of anointing, where the body of Jesus was laid down in preparation for his burial after Jesus' body was taken down off the cross. Then took they the body of Jesus and wound it in linen cloths with the spices, as the manner of the Jews is to bury. From here we shall turn left and arrive at the Chapel of the Three Marys. This is the spot that, according to the Gospels, marks the place where the three Marys stood and watched the crucifixion and then the burial of Jesus. Now there stood by the cross of Jesus his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Cleophas, and Mary Magdalene. If we want to imagine what the three Marys had watched, we shall stand behind this chapel and look toward the Golgotha over there. From here, we shall enter the rotunda, where the tomb of Jesus is located. But today, we shall go to the west side of the rotunda, where the Coptic chapel is located, right at the back of the edicule. Inside this chapel, there is a stone, which is the back head of Jesus' tomb. This is the actual rock part of Jesus' tomb, while inside the edicule, the tomb is covered by marble stones in order to protect it.
This is inside the tomb.
Now, let's turn further back to the western extremity of the rotunda. It is the Chapel of the Syrians. The conflict between the Syrians and the Armenians over the ownership of the room has led to its degradation. Each Sunday, the Syrian Orthodox celebrate Mass in this room. Over there is the entrance to a passageway that leads to the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. The discovery of this Jewish tomb confirms the usage of this area as a burial site during the time of Jesus, and by that gives confirmation that this is the actual site of Jesus' burial. Now, let's go to the area inside the church which is associated with the resurrection of Jesus. We first arrive at the Chapel of Mary Magdalene, which is dedicated to the encounter between Mary Magdalene and Jesus after his resurrection. When Mary tried to touch her master, Jesus said, "Touch me not, for I am not yet ascended to my Father." Right next to this chapel is the Franciscan chapel of the apparition of Jesus to his mother, as is narrated in the apocryphal book of the Resurrection of Christ by Bartholomew the Apostle. The column here on the right is part of the column of flagellation, to which Jesus was tied during his flagellation. To the left is a bronze status depicting Jesus meeting his mother Mary, and here on the shelf are 14 bronze statues that mark the stations of the cross. Now, let's continue through the north aisle of the church, moving east. This area is called the Arks of the Virgin, which commemorates the visits of Mary to the tomb of her son. When we look around, we can see the remains of the first Byzantine basilica, such as this back wall and these smaller columns with a rough exterior. Heading east, we shall visit 4 chapels that mark events along the final journey of Jesus. These chapels were built so pilgrims could commemorate scenes from the Passion within the church while they were not allowed to move freely in the streets of the city. The first one is the prison of Christ, where Jesus was held prior to his trial. The second one is the chapel of Saint Longinus, dedicated to the Roman soldier who with his lance pierced Christ's side, from which blood and water immediately flowed out. When he saw that, Longinus immediately accepted Jesus as the Son of God. Truly, this was the Son of God. To the right is the third one, the Chapel of the Division of the Holy Robes, which commemorates Jesus being stripped of his garments by the Roman soldiers. Between this chapel and the fourth one are the stairs leading to the Chapel of Saint Helena, for which I have a special video. We are now at the fourth chapel, the Chapel of Derision, which commemorates the insults of the priests and the people towards Jesus at the beginning of his last journey to his crucifixion. Here, we can see a preserved fragment of the column on which, according to tradition, Christ sat when the crown of thorns was put on his head. There is a belief that if you put your ear to the altar, you can hear the sound of laughter. We are now right next to the rock of Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified, and here we can see part of the actual rock of Golgotha exposed. Now, let's go upstairs to Golgotha and have a closer look. Here is the place where the Holy Cross stood. As you can see, pilgrims are getting down on their knees to enter their hand to touch the rock of Golgotha at the very place where the cross stood. When we look at the rock of Golgotha from the side, we can see the crack in the rock caused, according to earliest Christian tradition, by the earthquake that occurred at the moment of Jesus' death. The crack was said to have allowed Christ's blood to fall upon and thereby redeem Adam, who is thought to have been buried right below Golgotha, where today is the Chapel of Adam, right below us.
So that organization, JewishExperience.com, has lots and lots and lots of videos. And I'm hoping that none of them are copyrighted. I tried briefly this, and so I'm hoping that the recording of this session will go into YouTube without a problem. Moving on to the Muslim world, the Dome of the Rock. So the Dome of the Rock is built in about the year 700 of the Common Era, which means this building, although it has been, rebuilt because there's been earthquakes and so on, but basically the Dome of the Rock has stood there for about 1,300 years. In Jewish tradition, it's built over the site that is the creation of the universe. We heard discuss this in the class on Kabbalah. It's thought also to be the site where Abraham went to sacrifice his son, whether that son was Isaac or Ishmael. And the thing that makes it sacred to Islam is that it's the site of Muhammad's night journey from earth to heaven, where he goes through the 7 levels of heaven and encounters the prophets and Allah. Technically, the dome is not a mosque. I heard in some of these videos that the whole Temple Mount is considered a mosque, and there is something called the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount, third holiest spot in Islam. Very familiar pictures. Here is the Western Wall area, the bridge going up, the Dome of the Rock. Beautiful Arabic calligraphy from the Quran is what decorates the dome. And here is a video, and this I think is a pretty good video.
The Dome of the Rock is one of the most iconic buildings in the world, showing up in travel posters everywhere as an integral part of the Jerusalem skyline. It's one of the most sacred sites in the world for Muslims today, believed to be the site of the Prophet Muhammad's night journey and ascension, a story briefly told in the Quran and expanded in later literature, in which Muhammad miraculously travels from Mecca to Jerusalem overnight before ascending into heaven to meet the prophets and God. The building is also a source of controversy, as it stands on the same spot as the first and second Jewish temples, the holiest site for Jews and a site of vital importance to their religious history. Control of the Temple Mount itself, or as it's called by Muslims, the Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, remains in a delicate political balance. The Israeli government controls access, but the Jerusalem Waqf, an Islamic administrative body largely funded by the Jordanian government, manages all of the affairs in the sanctuary itself. For a building that looms so large in history and modern politics, what even is the Dome of the Rock? What was it used for, and what's its status today? First of all, it's important to realize that the Dome of the Rock is not a mosque, but better described as a shrine. However, we're not exactly sure about its original meaning and intended ritual function. It was built in the late 7th century under the Umayyads, an early Islamic dynasty that wrested control of Jerusalem away from the Byzantine Empire. By that time, it seems that the Temple Mount had been abandoned. Centuries before, in 70 CE, the Roman general Titus had destroyed the second Jewish temple, and the Romans had built a temple to Jupiter in its place. But by the time the Umayyads got there, many scholars think that the Christian rulers of Jerusalem were using it as a garbage dump, having long since plundered it for its stone for other building projects. This is largely based on textual evidence, though. It's possible that some sort of Christian structure was on the Temple Mount at the time, and it was not abandoned after all. This is based on pieces of a late antique church found by the Temple Mount Sifting Project, an Israeli archaeological project sifting through 9,000 tons of soil dug out during a controversial renovation by the Waqf in 1999. Regardless, the Umayyads started construction on the Dome of the Rock and completed it sometime in the 690s, according to an inscription inside the building itself. And although its octagonal shape is unique for Islamic architecture, this was not a unique shape for nearby Byzantine churches and shrines at the time. Octagonal churches could be found throughout the region. In fact, the archaeologist Rena Abner argues that the Dome of the Rock architects must have modeled it after the Church of the Kathisma only 3 miles away on the outskirts of Jerusalem. This octagonal church was active at the same time as the Dome of the Rock, and it also features a stone at its center, where it was believed that the Mother Mary had rested on her way to Bethlehem. You can still see this today. It's sitting on the side of a highway, and you can clearly see its original octagonal shape and the rock at its center. The interior space for both of these buildings was suited for walking around a stone. Scholars like to use the fancy term circumambulating, walking around a specific rock or pillar or some object, which was a common ritual practice in the late antique Mediterranean world. So it's likely that the Dome of the Rock was drawing on these cultural cues, purpose-built as a pilgrimage shrine, possibly to promote Muslim pilgrimage to Jerusalem. As for its symbolic meaning, its association with Muhammad's night journey actually doesn't become established until decades later. The Umayyad Caliph who built the Dome of the Rock, Abd al-Malik, might have built it with this in mind, but we're not sure. Now, of course, he knew the significance of the Temple Mount and may have built the Dome of the Rock as a visual symbol of authority over Christianity, as it would have been rivaling similar domes nearby, specifically the Church of the Holy Sepulcher. In fact, the dimensions of these two domes are almost identical, and there's an inscription inside the Dome of the Rock that specifically counteracts Christian theology by proclaiming Jesus was only a prophet and not God incarnate. incarnate. But al-Malik could have also built it as a visual symbol of Islam's continuation with past Abrahamic traditions. As the site of Solomon's original temple, he may have been symbolically placing himself in this lineage of great kings. But what's the deal with the rock? As the name suggests, the Dome of the Rock is built over a huge chunk of bedrock, sometimes called the foundation stone. For Muslims, this rock is believed to be the exact spot that Muhammad ascended into heaven during his night journey. For many Jews, though, it's the site where God started the creation of the world, where Abraham almost sacrificed his son Isaac, and later became the site of the Holy of Holies in the First Temple. Now, most archaeologists agree that this rock formed the foundation of these earlier temples, though the current political situation makes excavations around the site impossible to confirm this scientifically. Regardless, there might not be anything left to find under the Dome of the Rock, since it seems that later Roman and Byzantine construction projects scraped the bedrock clean as they plundered materials for their own buildings. Below the stone is a partially man-made grotto where you can find a mihrab, a decorative niche that indicates the direction toward Mecca to pray. Although mihrabs are usually found in mosques, as I said earlier, the Dome of the Rock is not a mosque. The nearby Al-Aqsa Mosque, also built during the Umayyad period, fulfills the function of congregational prayer for the local Muslim community. On my visit, the Dome of the Rock was fairly empty, and it seemed to be used for private devotion. A few women were reading the Quran nearby, a few other men and women were walking around the stone, and in the grotto beneath there was one woman reading or praying by herself. But let's move on to the architectural overview. Another misconception about the Dome of the Rock is that we are looking at its original state of preservation. But the building as we see it today has undergone countless renovations over the centuries. Before the 16th century, for example, the exterior was decorated with mosaics rather than the tiles that we see today, which, in and of themselves, are 20th century replicas of Ottoman-era tiles. The Temple Mount sifting project, which I mentioned earlier, possibly has discovered thousands of fragments of this original mosaic, some of which are covered in gold. You can see them right here on the screen. The dome itself was originally copper, and the 10th century geographer Muqaddisi said it was gilded, but later during the Middle Ages it was covered with lead, which remained in place until the 20th century. In fact, old photographs show the lead dome still in place. The golden dome that we see today was not added until 1964 during the renovations sponsored by the King of Jordan. In some respects, the interior more closely mirrors the 7th century look, consisting of two sets of columns which appear to have been taken from nearby Byzantine churches during its construction. Some ancient mosaics with plant and geometric patterns cover the walls, but some of these also come from the 1960s renovations, who replaced the wooden ceilings and wooden superstructure of the dome. And finally, let's move on to the controversies surrounding the site. As you can imagine, since two major religions view this site as sacred, tensions can run high. Even whether you call it the Temple Mount or the Haram al-Sharif can be taken as a political statement. As of 2018, when I published this video, non-Muslims are generally not allowed inside the Dome of the Rock, except under special circumstances, like being affiliated with an archaeological research institute as I was. The plaza itself is open to Jews and non-Muslims in general, but they are not permitted to pray, read religious texts, or wear religious clothing. Many Jewish religious authorities, including the chief rabbinate of Israel, discouraged Jews from entering the site in the first place. The Holy of Holies was the most sacred part of the first and second temples. Even the high priest was not allowed to enter unless on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year for most Jews. According to these rabbis, because the precise location of the Holy of Holies is unknown, there's a risk of accidentally entering it, and therefore, according to them, it's best not to enter the site at all. Other rabbis are confident in their calculations of where the Holy of Holies was, so they permit Jews to enter the Temple Mount as long as they stay out of these no-go zones and follow the rules of not openly praying. For some fringe groups, though, controversies stem from the desire to build a third Jewish temple in its place. Jewish perspectives on this are diverse. Most conservative and Orthodox Jews in particular believe in the restoration of a temple, but they say it can only happen in the Messianic age after certain miraculous signs have been fulfilled. However, a small minority advocate humans rebuilding the third temple in this age, notably the organization called the Temple Institute. Some fundamentalist Christian groups in America also support the rebuilding of the third temple, temple and see it as a catalyst that could spark the apocalypse, or the second coming of Christ. But for the time being, the status quo of the Temple Mount, or Haram al-Sharif, is maintained in its delicate political and religious balance, with the Dome of the Rock standing as one of the most iconic buildings in the world. As always, sources are in the description.
Okay. Yeah, someone I noticed in the chat asked about an incident which led to an intifada, and it was that group tried to lay a cornerstone to build the third temple, and that caused a riot. The Israeli police came in, you know, and things just escalated and escalated. So here are some pictures inside the Dome of the Rock, kind of giving you a sense of the rock in the center. You can look actually over, you know, a panel and look at the rock. This is the chamber in the bottom. There's a hole in the chamber. It's right there. And then I was pursuing this book, which really spends a lot of time trying to find where the original Holy of Holies is. So I tried to orient this picture with his diagram, and he speculates that this was the Holy of Holies, and exactly in the center is a rectangular spot. I mean, if you look at the top of the rock and the Dome of the Rock, you see these places where things have been chiseled away. And it turns out that I think it's this piece right here is the exact dimensions of the Ark of the Covenant. So there's a lot of interesting archaeology going on in this world. This is my day. This is a very short video. I spent, you know, a few hours at the sifting project. As you'll see, what my group was sifting was not actually from the Temple Mount, but was from the path between the city of David to the Temple Mount. And I have some pictures of that as well. So here's a very brief video. And this is just taken by yours truly.
Everything is out of the bucket and onto the tray.
So we're being instructed by an archaeologist on what to do when we do our own sifting.
Okay. Once you've got everything out of the bucket, like a stack of these buckets over there, you'll spread the material out on your tray, give it a shower, and then start looking through it. Now the easiest thing to see on the tray is usually the pottery. It's going to be red and flat. You can come up here and look at this. You can see what's there. So we're going to pick up any pottery that's bigger than my thumbnail.
Okay, and just put it into, you know, various bins. So here is an artist's concept of what the walkway looked like going from the city of David up to the Temple Mount. And there was a water channel that would basically carry drainage water away, and people would walk on the sidewalk. And this is a picture that I took actually walking in what I'm pretty sure was the drainage channel. And in some of these tunnels, I mean, I had scrapes on my hands because it was almost hard to walk through the tunnel. And most of you know that I'm not exactly a big guy, but some of these tunnels were actually quite narrow. And then this is at the end where this is the excavation of the sidewalk that was used going up and into the Temple Mount. This is actually just some of the stuff that we found. So this is an animal's bone that we found. And for us, the most exciting thing that we found was a Roman nail. And boy, if there's anything I wish I could have taken home, it would have been this. This is, again, found around the time of the crucifixion. Well, it would have been there. Well, who knows when it was actually there. But this was a Roman nail. And, you know, what the archaeologist said, this would have been very representative of the kinds of nails that tradition suggests that Jesus was nailed to the cross. There's again a picture. So this, my partner and I found it as we did the sifting. Okay, so I'm going to conclude with this picture. And as I say, it's not their idea of a rabbi and not my idea of border police. Once I led a tour in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, and the young woman who led us on the tour confessed at the very end that we were her first group after her training to lead her through. So she was very excited about this. So I was identified as the rabbi, And I asked her, have you ever hugged a rabbi? And her reaction was like, oh, you know, because rabbis in Israel, by and large, are Orthodox, and men and women would never even touch each other. So after a little bit of hesitancy, I managed to get a hug from the tour guide. And again, my guess is these two Israeli border police probably weren't used to rabbis hugging and you know, being without the payas and so on. I want to give, and I apologize for those of you who have seen this before, this is sort of my theory of interfaith dialogue and communication. And I may have even showed this in an earlier session. So basically a bunch of blind people examining an elephant, everybody sees something different. And they can argue about it and maybe even get into a holy war about who's telling the truth. And of course, they're all telling the truth, but none of them can see the entirety of God. And so perhaps my understanding of interfaith discussion and dialogue is that each of us can only understand a portion of God's totality, God being much, you know, beyond human understanding, and that our error is one of lack of humility to recognize that. And so I love interfaith dialogue because I want to see other people's understanding of God, and it enriches mine. And then of course I often say that the blind people all hear the creatures speak, and the sound they hear is actually probably like a shofar. I'm just going to grab my shofar for a second. I'm not going to play it, but the sound of the shofar, they hear the same thing, and I would suggest it's the golden rule. I just want to show off, particularly to Larry and Amarillo, that I have now put a COVID mask on the end of my shofar, and it's ready for services. So the last thing I want to show you is a little video of the last time I was in Israel, and it was an interfaith trip. And the thing I love about this brief end of the service is here we have a bunch of Jews praying, but some of these people are very serious Christians, and we're praying just under Robinson's Arch. I think you can get a sense of it on a Shabbat service. And in the background, while we're praying, you can hear from the Temple Mount the Muslim call to worship. So just, it's pretty brief. Less than a minute.
O Heavenly One, protector and redeemer of Israel, bless the state of Israel which marks the dawning of hope for all.
Robinson's Arch is right here.
Spread over a canopy of your peace, send your light and truth to all who lead and advise. Guide them with good counsel. Establish peace in the land and fullness of joy for all who dwell here. Amen.
Before we take leave of our Kabbalat Shabbat service here in the old city of Jerusalem, as we stand right below where the temple stood, we recall the practice of the priests. At the end of each service, the Kohanim would appear on the temple stairs and bless the people with the blessing from the Torah.
So I think if I do this, you won't be able to see it. So again, I'm gonna, yeah, there you are, Cheryl. I have a feeling that you won't see it, so I may have to back out and back in again. Let's see what happens. So are you seeing the, actually, I can't even see Cheryl. So Cheryl, just unmute. Are you seeing the Western Wall live cam? Yes or no?
Okay.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. So I need to stop share. And then I need to go here. Let's see if I can do this. And hang on, I'm going to get there. Whoa. This is not as easy as I thought. Hang on. This is worth seeing though. Whoops, I can't minimize Zoom. Okay. Well, let's see. I'm going to try and do a share screen. Let's see what happens. Okay, yes, I think we'll be able to see it. Okay, I think you see it now, yes? But
Well, I see the link. You haven't started anything.
yeah, and actually now I can't see it. So let me see if I, okay, so let's see if it works. So this is a live cam of the Temple Mount as it appears right now. It looks like it's just about sunset. Can everybody still see
Don't
it?
see anything.
Now then.
Nope.
Hang on, do you see it now?
No.
No.
Okay, this is annoying. Let me try and share screen again. So I won't try and maximize it. Okay. So same question. Do you see it now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
There it is.
So I can't maximize it. This, no. But this is actually a live cam of the Temple Mount. One of the things I wanted to point out is what I call ring around the kotel. You may have noticed this in some of the earlier pictures. The bottom roughly 6 feet of the Temple Mount is stained because of 2,000 years of people touching it. The other thing that's kind of fun, I hope you'll be able to see this, is a time lapse of the, I think, the last 24 hours. Let's see if it works. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So what you see is it's sunrise. People are gathering for morning prayers. And it looks like they set up tents to get out of the sun. It's August. And then between prayer services, it gets a little less crowded. And then we'll see a bunch of afternoon prayers. And then we'll see evening prayers. And then and so you can see the ring around the kotel there. Sun is setting.
There it goes, yeah.
And kotel's getting more and more crowded for evening prayers and probably tourists as well. And then
there's Uncle Moshe.
You're right, exactly. And if you go to this website, which is skylinewebcams.com, you will find live webcams, you know, in the Spanish Steps in Rome and all over the world. So that's kind of fun. That is, oh, that's, sorry. Let's see, that's what I would do. Okay, I think I've stopped sharing. Okay, so that concludes the class. Thank you all for coming. And so I'm not rushing off anywhere, and I'll keep recording. So if you have questions or, you know, requests for clarifications, I'm happy to entertain them. And then I'll mention, actually, before I call on Richard, my intent is after the holidays to have an 18-session class on Jewish literacy. That's actually, there are videos of when I taught this about a year ago, and my intent is to do this not only for Jews who want to deepen their knowledge of Judaism, but for people who are interested in conversion. It will probably be Wednesday evenings, and I'll probably have a second session every Thursday evening for non-Jews, and particularly for people interested in conversion, so you can ask questions that you might not want to ask in the full group. So first I'll call on Richard and then Murray. You're muted, Richard.
I have two questions. One might be a little more detailed than the other, but first question is, you know, I think Jews can agree what the Western Wall.
First of all, once you say Jews and agree, I probably not, but go ahead.
Can most Jews agree what the Western Wall is?
Mm-hmm.
And most Muslims can agree what the site of the Dome of the Rock is.
Yes.
But I'm wondering if Christians, like when we were given a tour of, you know, some of the tombs and so forth, and there was this room that depicted where Jesus lay, or where I'm so ignorant in Christian history, but would most Christians feel that, yes, these things happen in these rooms? Would a Protestant and a Catholic and a Lutheran and
yes.
Yeah. So I would say it would be all over the map.
Yeah.
Until fairly recently, there was a site called the Garden Tomb. When the British came in and took over Jerusalem, they went to the Church of the Holy Sepulcher, and it wasn't anybody's image of what Jesus' burial spot would look like. It was a crowded, dingy, noisy, crazy place, and you got a sense of that. It's not beautiful because there's a restriction on anybody doing any renovations, so there are none. So the British general found a site in Jerusalem, not very far, which had a rock that looked like a skull, and he found some graves, and it was in a garden. And if you sort of imagine from your Christian Bible stories, if you have Christian Bible stories, what the site of Jesus' crucifixion and burial would look like, it looked like it. And for many years, there was this running controversy And I would say, I'm guessing that was mostly the Protestants that thought the garden site was the tomb. And so when I visited there, which would have been 20 years ago, even in the pamphlets, they would say it's highly unlikely that this is the actual tomb. So I would say Christians, by and large, would agree that the Church of the Holy Sepulcher is the burial spot of Jesus.
Yes.
Whether they would agree that this particular niche is where the three Marys stood, I would say those are articles of faith. And I don't know that there's any geology that confirms it. I mean, for me, it's a matter of archaeology, and what does archaeology have to say?
Thank you. Second real quick question. Whenever I see the Western Wall, there's always like plants and weeds growing out of the wall. And I'm wondering if there's any agricultural care that's, roots can be sort of damaging to concrete and so forth.
Yeah.
Do they do anything to try to mitigate those plants?
They're typically up high, so they're not growing out of the oldest stones, but I'm not aware that it's either cultivated or or they're spraying herbicide on it. But if you looked at the older pictures, you saw a lot more, and I don't know why. So Murray, we can't hear you, but you don't seem to be muted. So can't hear you now. So keep trying. I'll call on Kat.
I was just going to ask you, like when we were watching that video and you said that there was a link below, the one where you were skipping over like most of the Christian stuff. If you could just send that link to me.
All right. So here's the deal. Go on my website.
Okay.
Go to the classes page.
Okay.
Click on the slides.
Okay.
And you'll get a PDF of all the slides.
Okay.
And the link is there. And I discovered today, I didn't know this, that even in the PDF, if you click on it, you'll just go there. You don't even have to retype it.
Really? Okay.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you.
Surprised me too, David.
Yeah.
I'm trying again. Can you hear me?
Yes, hear you now. Yeah.
Okay.
You don't have to shout.
The video on Solomon's Temple, there were a lot of statues of mythical creatures. Is that not a violation of the no graven images?
Yeah. So the interesting question in Jewish law is the text actually says, make no images of anything that's in the heavens above or the heavens below, nor should you worship them. Okay. So the question is, if you're not supposed to make any graven images, why do we have to be told not to worship them? Therefore, the rabbi said it's okay in Judaism to make images. And here I have my baseball card of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the rabbi's trading cards. And lest you think it's only the Lubavitcher Rebbe, here's Jesus, my souvenirs from Israel. Here's a whole bunch of different rabbis. Collect your favorite. I think it has their batting averages on the back. So you see lots of images. In fact, in every Chabad home, you'll see an image of the Rebbe. And my understanding is that in Judaism, by and large, since it says don't make them or worship them, they relax the prohibition against making them as long as you don't worship them.
Right.
In Islam, they take it very literally and very seriously. And there are ultra-Orthodox sects that also take it very literally and seriously. And I don't know if there's any archaeological evidence that those particular, they look like sphinxes to me, if they actually existed. So I'm going to ask Murray if you got your sound back. I think.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Oh yeah, we hear her.
All right. Two normal length things.
Oh, I can put my hand down.
First, I wanted to put up the video because I dug this up. That's a picture of yours truly during my teen years